She never forgot the sound of laughter that day. It rolled across the classroom like a cruel tide, fueled by the single word her teacher flung at her with biting disdain. Stupid. The syllables branded themselves into her mind, sharp as glass, burning deeper than the mocking stares of her classmates. She lowered her gaze, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. On the surface, she was silent, still, small. But inside, something shifted. The word that was meant to crush her had carved a vow instead, one she would never release. While the room buzzed with whispers, she sat unmoved, the edges of her lips almost curving in a smile no one could read. The pain was sharp, but behind her calm mask, it forged a silent promise. The teacher thought the insult ended there. Her classmates thought she had been broken. But in her quiet, in the shadows of her silence, she whispered to herself that one day this moment would not belong to them. It would belong to her. That vow, made beneath their laughter, grew stronger than the sting of humiliation. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Days turned into weeks, and yet the word clung to her thoughts. It echoed when she studied, when she pretended to stumble over lessons, when she endured the smirks of those who parroted the insult behind her back. But instead of cutting her down, it transformed. Each replay was no longer pain, it was fire. Every letter of that word became fuel, burning steadily, warming her resolve until it was unshakable. What began as hurt became a relentless drive, shaping her mind with precision sharper than the teacher's careless tongue. She did not strike back, not yet. Instead, she watched. She waited. In her silence, she studied not only her lessons, but her teacher as well. The rise and fall of her voice, the careless way she flaunted her authority, the contradictions that slipped between her words. What others saw as confidence, she began to see as cracks. And while the world thought she was still the stupid girl sitting at the back, she was building a map of weaknesses, one mistake at a time. Soon, those cracks widened. The teacher's arrogance was no longer seamless, assignments misplaced, instructions contradicted, favoritism revealed in the harsh light of repetition. What once looked like control now looked like disorder. The students whispered about it, dismissing it as stress, as distraction. But she knew better. This was the beginning. Opportunity had shown its face, and she gathered everything. Every slip of the tongue, every careless oversight, every moment where the mask of authority wavered. Like a patient spider, she wove these threads together into something unbreakable. The teacher's own lies, the very arrogance she wore like armor, became the web that would soon strangle her. All the while, she never let her expression change. She bore the weight of mockery with a straight back, her silence hiding the storm. Her role was perfect. The quiet girl who pretended not to understand, the one who blushed at ridicule and stumbled through answers. The teacher never questioned the performance, convinced that she had already won, convinced that the insult had carved truth. But behind her eyes, fire waited. She wore compliance like a mask, and with every passing day, her disguise drew the teacher closer to her own destruction. It began with a single move, small enough to go unnoticed, a pointed question asked at the right time, a contradiction revealed, but wrapped in innocence. The teacher brushed it off at first, but the unease lingered. Soon, whispers began to spread among the students. Doubt flickered where certainty once ruled. The balance had shifted, though only she understood how completely the trap was set. And then came the moment no one saw coming. When the teacher tried to humiliate her once more, expecting compliance, she struck with precision. The evidence she had gathered slipped effortlessly into the open: contradictions, lies, proof of favoritism. Each word landed not with anger, but with calm certainty. The students, once laughing at her, now turned on the teacher. The room that had once been a stage for her humiliation became her arena of triumph. The teacher stumbled, desperate to regain control, but her own arrogance drowned her. Every attempt at defense unraveled under the weight of her mistakes. The authority she once held collapsed in on itself. What was once power was now ridicule. What was once dominance was now disgrace. The very stage where she had silenced her victim now silenced her instead, and with that, the promise was kept. The insult that had once haunted her was buried beneath her quiet triumph. She never needed to shout, never needed to gloat. The word stupid had lost all its power, replaced by proof of intelligence, strength, and unshakable will. The fire she carried inside had burned the shame to ash, leaving only victory. She walked away from it all stronger than she had ever been. Revenge had not been the end, but the beginning. She no longer carried the weight of humiliation. It had been transformed into a foundation of steel, and as she stepped forward into a life where her worth was unquestionable, one truth remained unshakable. She had been reborn, not through cruelty, but through fire. She never expected her world to shift with a single word, but that day, it did. The teacher's voice cut through the classroom like a whip, her insult striking harder than any blow. Stupid. The laughter that followed swelled and wrapped around her, binding her in humiliation. She sat still, her cheeks burning, but she did not cry. She did not protest. She only lowered her eyes, letting them all believe she had been defeated. Inside, however, a fire had been lit. She carried the insult not as a wound, but as a weapon, waiting for its time. In the days that followed, she said nothing. She let the classroom chatter fade around her, blending into the background. The teacher grew bolder, weaving mockery into her lessons, feeding her own ego on the silence she mistook for weakness. The students followed suit, repeating the teacher's disdain in whispers and giggles. But behind the protagonist's calm mask, her unease sharpened into something more focused. She began to notice the patterns others overlooked, the way the teacher twisted situations, the way she favored some students and quietly sabotaged others. Each cruelty, once invisible, now shone like cracks in a mask. The realization came slowly but undeniably. It wasn't just her. The teacher had built her authority on deception, stealing credit for work that wasn't hers, crushing those who dared to outshine her, and wrapping it all in a veneer of false confidence. What had seemed like guidance was nothing more than manipulation. Every story the teacher spun, every rule bent for her favorites, every sneer disguised as discipline, it all wove together into a truth the protagonist could no longer ignore. She swallowed her anger, burying it deep beneath the surface where no one could see. To the world, she remained the quiet, foolish girl who tripped over her answers. But in silence, she began her work. She remembered everything: the misplaced assignments, the contradictions in instructions, the unfair punishments. Small details that others dismissed became the threads of her plan. She carried them carefully, as though weaving a tapestry no one else could see. Her pain had become strategy, her silence a shield. The teacher, arrogant in her belief of superiority, grew careless. The more she mocked, the more mistakes she made. She exposed her favoritism openly, confident no one would challenge her. She twisted facts, thinking her students too timid to notice. But she did notice. Every error, every contradiction, every reckless word. She gathered them all, stitching them into a net strong enough to hold her enemy. The trap was no longer an idea. It was nearly ready to close. The moment arrived not with fury, but with precision. One carefully phrased question, asked in front of the class, drew attention to a contradiction the teacher had overlooked. Another, subtle reminder of her favoritism stirred whispers among the students. Slowly, the mask of the stupid girl began to slip, replaced by a sharp intelligence that stunned everyone. The teacher, unprepared for the shift, faltered, and in that stumble, the balance of power shifted forever. The downfall came quickly. The evidence of lies, favoritism, and manipulation was undeniable once the students began to see it. The room, that had once been her stage of humiliation, now echoed with the teacher's unraveling. The same arrogance that had silenced her now drowned the teacher. Exposed before those she once controlled, the authority that seemed so untouchable crumbled. Under its own weight, she did not gloat. She did not shout. She stood calm, her victory carved in silence as her teacher's lies collapsed. The insult that once haunted her lost its power entirely, buried beneath the truth she had revealed. For the first time, she looked at the faces around her and saw no mockery, only recognition. Walking away, she felt lighter than she ever had before, stronger. She had proven that silence was never weakness. It was patience. It was preparation. And in the end, it had been her greatest weapon. Revenge was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. A life no longer defined by someone else's cruelty, but by her strength, her intelligence, and her resolve never to be silenced again. She had learned long ago that silence was sharper than words. Every cutting remark, every red mark slashed across her papers, every dismissive glance from the teacher was endured without protest. But beneath her calm surface, suspicion was growing. It wasn't just one bad grade or one cruel comment. It was a pattern, a methodical cruelty masked as authority. When others dismissed it as strict discipline, she began to see the truth. Her teacher didn't correct mistakes. She destroyed futures. Memories resurfaced with the quiet precision of wounds reopened. She recalled how her science project, the one she had poured weeks into, had been accidentally misplaced before competition day. How an essay, praised in private by a substitute, mysteriously earned a failing grade once returned by the teacher. Each recollection added weight to her resolve. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't chance. It was sabotage. And it had happened, too often to be ignored. The truth revealed itself in fragments at first, like threads tugging loose from a carefully woven disguise. A fabricated score sheet that didn't match her original exam. Whispers from classmates who had been warned, against questioning results. Subtle intimidation laced into every interaction. Don't push too hard, or you'll regret it. Slowly, the image of a teacher dedicated to discipline unraveled into something darker. A woman who craved control, who thrived on the power to crush ambition. Her arrogance was her greatest tell. Secure in tenure, shielded by years of intimidation, the teacher flaunted her dominance without fear. She boasted of the careers she had shaped, conveniently omitting the lives she had quietly dismantled. She moved through the hallways like a queen untouchable, blind to the whispers gathering behind her, blind to the cracks that were already spreading through the empire she had built on fear. The student remained quiet, eyes lowered when addressed, hands steady when collecting yet another barely passing grade. But behind that composure, every detail was stored. Falsified gradebooks, contradictions in reports, the names of those who had suffered before her. She never confronted, never challenged. She only observed, knowing that evidence gathered in silence would one day roar louder than protest ever could. While the teacher clung to her crumbling control, the student was climbing higher. She excelled beyond the classroom, entering competitions outside the school, earning recognition that couldn't be erased by a red pen. Her reputation grew, her network expanded, and with every achievement, the teacher's shadow over her dimmed. Strength was being built in the shadows, brick by brick, invisible to the one who believed she had buried her. It wasn't just her fight anymore. Quiet conversations revealed a trail of bitterness stretching back years. Former students spoke of lost scholarships, parents of unanswered complaints, colleagues of intimidation masked as professionalism. Each story was a piece of a puzzle, proof that the cruelty had never been personal. It had been systemic. The teacher had enemies, far more than she realized, and the student was not alone in her resolve. Patience became her greatest weapon. On the surface, she played the role of diligent pupil, respectful and composed, never once letting her mask slip. Inside, however, she was preparing a counterattack so precise that no one would see it coming, not even the teacher who had built her career on predicting weakness. Every move was calculated, every detail timed, until the stage was set. All it would take was one misstep. And arrogance always ensured missteps. The teacher, overconfident in her untouchable power, signed her name to a falsified report without realizing the documents had already been duplicated. She dismissed a parent's concern with open disdain, unaware that the conversation was being recorded. She mocked her students one time too many, never suspecting that their quiet smiles were no longer fear, but anticipation. The trap had been set. The walls she believed impenetrable were already closing in, and the student, silent as ever, was ready to watch it all collapse. She had watched long enough to see the full extent of the teacher's confidence, the way it had calcified into arrogance. Each day, the woman strutted through her classroom as if the walls themselves bowed to her authority, intoxicated by the power she wielded. Her voice carried over the room with absolute certainty, and any dissent was met with derision. No one dared challenge her, or so she believed. That illusion of untouchable control made her reckless, leaving gaps, cracks in her armor that only a patient observer could exploit. It began with a mistake too bold to ignore. A student's project, carefully documented and verified, had been falsified in the official record, a minor slip, but enough to ignite suspicion. Then a parent, frustrated and persistent, questioned the grading process openly. The teacher waved the concerns away with a condescending laugh, unaware that those small tremors were being watched and catalogued by the one person she had underestimated, her quietest student. From her quiet vantage, the protagonist had steadily placed herself where every word, every action, and every document could be monitored. She held a hidden hand behind the curtain, unseen yet in full control. Where the teacher assumed isolation and secrecy protected her, the protagonist's patience allowed her to infiltrate the very systems that the teacher considered safe. No file was beyond reach, no record too obscure, no conversation immune to her careful attention. Step by step, she gathered the truth with surgical precision. Records of grades, emails between staff, complaints buried in the principal's inbox, all were uncovered without a hint of detection. Testimonies from students and even hesitant colleagues were quietly corroborated, digital trails followed, and secured. Each piece added to a mosaic, forming a picture of manipulation, favoritism, and deception so clear it could not be denied. With patience as her shield, she built a case unbreakable in its logic and completeness. Every lie, every omission, every act of intimidation was documented, verified, and compiled. No room remained for excuses, no possibility of defense. It was a record not of accusation alone, but of indisputable proof. Each page a step closer to justice, each statement a weight that the teacher could no longer ignore. Yet still, the teacher laughed, dismissing complaints with the arrogance of someone convinced that their tenure rendered them untouchable. She mocked, she jeered, she belittled anyone daring to challenge her. Each careless reaction, each dismissal, only strengthened the web the protagonist had been weaving in silence. The noose tightened invisibly, and the teacher, drunk on authority, remained blind to her own impending fall. Even with the case complete, the protagonist held back. She waited for the precise moment when the impact would be absolute, when timing would maximize the consequence. Every detail had been anticipated, every variable accounted for. She was not merely prepared, she was in control of the sequence, of her enemy's undoing. The predator never rushes. She bides her time until the kill is certain. And then, finally, the shift occurred. The teacher, once in complete control of her classroom, her students, her reputation, now realized, too late, that her fate was no longer hers. Every carefully constructed barrier collapsed under the weight of truth. Every laugh that once belittled the protagonist was now a reminder of vulnerability. Power, once absolute, had been transferred in silence, and the teacher could do nothing but watch as the consequences she had long ignored closed in, guided entirely by the hand she had underestimated. Her fate wasn't hers anymore. Every action, every decision, every attempt at damage control now answered to the one who had been silent all along. The control had shifted, irrevocably, and the protagonist stood at the center, composed, precise, and fully victorious, her patience and strategy vindicated in the ultimate reckoning. The room held an unusual stillness, a quiet tension that seemed to press against the walls. Every step the protagonist took was deliberate, measured, as if the air itself demanded caution. Her heart did not race, her breath remained steady. She had waited for this moment, built it with patience and precision, and now the culmination of years of silent observation and meticulous planning was at her fingertips. Each glance, each movement, conveyed the calm authority of someone who knew exactly what was coming, and that coming would be inevitable. On the desk before her lay the papers that would mark the end, termination notices, carefully drafted, each line a silent testament to the years of cruelty, manipulation, and fear the teacher had inflicted. They were more than documents. They were the embodiment of justice, the physical proof that the scales had been carefully balanced and were now tipping irrevocably. The protagonist placed her hand lightly on the stack, her composure unbroken, knowing that these papers would speak louder than any confrontation could. The teacher entered, her posture still proud, her steps confident, but a flicker of unease betrayed her as her eyes fell on the protagonist. The aura of invincibility she had cultivated for years began to crumble, subtle at first, like cracks in glass under pressure. The woman's glance lingered on the neatly arranged termination documents, her arrogance faltering as she realized that the balance of power had shifted. The student she had belittled, dismissed, and undermined now wielded authority in a form she had never imagined. Words, concise and precise, carried the weight of years in a single exchange. "It seems the roles have changed," the protagonist said softly, each syllable deliberate. The phrase cut through the teacher's composure sharper than any blade, echoing years of insults once hurled at the very student now standing before her. There was no anger in the tone, only the calm assertion of control, the subtle declaration that the time of subservience had ended and the era of reckoning had begun. Every motion, every word, every detail of the plan executed itself flawlessly. The protagonist remained composed as the teacher scrambled for explanations, her flustered attempts to regain dominance only reinforcing the inevitability of her fall. The careful accumulation of evidence, the silent gathering of witnesses, the precise timing, all aligned in a perfect orchestration. The teacher's former power meant nothing against the quiet mastery of preparation and patience. The weight of realization settled heavily on the antagonist. She understood too late that every act of manipulation, every stolen opportunity, every fabricated score had contributed directly to this moment. Her own hands had constructed the framework of her downfall. There was no one to blame but herself, no escape from the consequences she had ignored for so long. Each memory she had buried now returned as evidence, undeniable and absolute. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Only the quiet catastrophe of truth laid bare, the devastating reflection of a life spent exerting control finally turned inward. The teacher's influence collapsed under its own weight, and the classroom, once a stage of humiliation and fear, became the arena of justice rendered without spectacle, precise and inescapable. And in the final line, spoken softly yet undeniably, the ultimate reversal crystallized. It seems your own stupidity wrote the story for you. The insult that had once defined the protagonist now served as proof of the antagonist's undoing. Years of cruelty, arrogance, and manipulation were undone not by force, but by patience, intelligence, and quiet determination. Silence had never been weakness. It had been preparation, mastery, and ultimately triumph. The news traveled quietly at first, a subtle ripple that became impossible to ignore. The teacher who had once ruled the corridors with an iron fist, whose word was law, and whose arrogance seemed untouchable, was no longer untouchable. Her dismissal, the consequence of years of meticulous observation and careful planning, spread through the school like wildfire. Colleagues who once sought her approval now avoided her gaze, their whispers carrying more weight than any confrontation. Isolation crept in slowly, a reminder that power built on cruelty is always fragile. Whispers became conversations, and conversations became judgments. Her reputation, once pristine and commanding, crumbled under the weight of accumulated truths. Every action, every manipulation, every stolen opportunity resurfaced in the minds of those she had wronged. There was no need for spectacle. The public. Humiliation unfolded naturally, a byproduct of her own deeds laid bare. The teacher, once confident and untouchable, floundered under the silent scrutiny of eyes that had long witnessed her true nature. For the students and parents who had endured her tyranny, a sense of vindication swept through the halls. Grievances. Long buried found acknowledgement, and the subtle injustices that had gone unnoticed finally received the weight they deserved. The protagonist had not shouted, had not demanded recognition, yet her careful strategy allowed justice to take its course. Those who had suffered felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the balance had finally been restored, that cruelty and arrogance had consequences. Through it all, the protagonist walked with composure, her steps measured and deliberate. She did not gloat, did not speak triumphantly. The success of her plan, the irreversible outcome, spoke for itself. Every glance, every acknowledgement of the teacher's downfall reinforced the power of patience and intelligence over rash retaliation. In her calm, there was a lesson unspoken. True strength lies not in vengeance, but in careful preparation and unshakable resolve. Years of meticulous observation, patience, and calculated action now proved their worth. Every moment of restraint, every silent note of evidence, every unspoken plan came together to demonstrate that composure outlasts cruelty. The protagonist's methodical approach had rendered the teacher's years of unchecked authority meaningless, highlighting that intelligence and patience can dismantle even the most confident facade of power. Alone, the antagonist packed her belongings, each item a reminder of opportunities squandered and mistakes that had once seemed inconsequential. The corridors that had echoed with her authority were now silent witnesses to her quiet defeat. The sharp edge of her fall was felt not in dramatic confrontation, but in the solitude of a power stripped away, in the unmistakable clarity that her reign had ended not through force, but through strategy and observation. In the quiet aftermath, the protagonist allowed herself a private reflection. The sharpest revenge is not a scream or a public spectacle, but the steady, undeniable proof of competence, patience, and intelligence. By walking away, leaving the ruins of arrogance and cruelty behind, she cemented her victory. Success, measured and composed, had triumphed where anger and vindictiveness would have faltered. And in that calm, deliberate triumph, the story reached its most satisfying conclusion. The quiet power of strategy, patience, and intellect had prevailed, leaving the world to bear witness to the ultimate lesson. True revenge is silent, and ultimate triumph belongs to those who wait, observe, and act with precision.